Ni hao, everybody. Hello, it's Jimmy Smith here. Wine with Jimmy. Pleasure to be here and welcome to my channel. This is all about wine education, really for those of you studying the world of wine, but you will find very interesting content if you just want to know more. So I help people with their professional studies with things like WSET. You see that at the top of the slide, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. Welcome to a video here on China. So this is going to be a two-part series on China, and China has become a recent important producer specifically of red wine, majorly led by Cabernet Sauvignon, by far the most planted grape variety, but also other Bordeaux varieties like Merlot, for example, and Carmenère, known locally as Cabernet Ganisht. Now, most Chinese people consider wine to be inherently red. The majority of Chinese wines are red in colour at all different price levels. They tend to be dry, with and without oak influence. Some will be off dry, and there are even sweet expressions that exist. There are much smaller amounts of white and pink wines made in China. So yes, I mentioned a two-parter here on China. This is going to be the video looking at the introduction, the history of wine in China, climate and grape growing, and a little bit on winemaking as well. As always, if you have a question or you have a comment, please get in touch. What are your experiences with Chinese wine? Do you like them? Have you visited? Are they available in your market? It would be very interesting to find out. Perhaps you have some good insights. Maybe you've been to some of the producers out in provinces like Hubei, Shanxi, Gansu, or even Ningxia. Okay, so let's start to talk about the introduction, really looking at the history of Chinese wine. So let's go back a long way to begin with. So the introduction of Vitis vinifera to China, we think dates back to around the 4th century BC. In the book on ancient Central Asian tracts, that's the brief narrative of 3 expeditions in innermost Asia and northwestern China, the author, Mark Orlstein, describes neat little tidy plots of vineyard sites outside the courtyard of houses in the ancient city of Ningxia. And you'll see that written at the bottom of your slide right there. So this is the 1st to the 3rd century BC. Now, this is located about 150 kilometers north to the modern Minfeng County, and that's in the area called Xinjiang in the northwesterly part of China today. In addition, both we have archaeological investigation by the Southern Xinjiang Expedition Team and also the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region Museum in 1959, and also in the China-Japan Cooperative Expedition in the Nia site, which occurred in 1988 to 1996. Now, there were relics excavated from an ancient tomb that had the decoration patterns of grape clusters like you see on your slide, as well as dried grapes in containers. Now, carbon-14 dating indicated the tomb is around 2,300 years old. So we know that we have basically viticulture and the production of wine dating to around that sort of 1st, 3rd, 2nd century BC. What's next in our history? So the general idea of Chinese grape growing and winemaking is believed to be around the time of the Emperor Wu of Han, so the Han dynasty. This is 140 to 88 BC. You'll see a depiction there of him on your slide with a little description there of his time in reign at the bottom. Then, from Eastern Han to the Tang dynasty, wine was always a luxury for high officials and nobility. According to the citation from the Book of the Later Han, in volume 972 of the imperial readings of the Taiping era, in the Eastern Han dynasty, a man called Meng Tu at Fufeng bribed a eunuch, Zhan Rang, with 1 hu, that's about 20 litres of wine, and successfully got an important position in the Lanzhou government at that time. So there's also written evidence that we have, along with that archaeological evidence. And we fast forward to really much more modern times. The turning point in the development of the Chinese wine industry was the start of the wine industrialization in the late Qing dynasty and the early Republic of China. In the late 19th century, the European missionaries brought the vine, seedlings, and winemaking technology to China. At the end of the 19th century, in 1892, an overseas Chinese businessman named Zhang Bishi, that you'll see written on your slide, also had many other names translated into other languages. He establishes the Shangyu winery in Yantai in the Shandong province, which marked the beginning of large-scale production of wine in modern-day China. But due to political events, the wine industry did not really develop substantially until the 20th century, well into the 20th century. 1949 to 1979, during this time, wines on the Chinese market were mainly products of blending partly fermented grape juice with other flavor agents. So this could not be called wine by today's standards. In China, the Great Wall Wine Company only produced the first bottle of dry white wine with the local grape variety Longyan in 1979. So we are talking really in the modern era. Now, the expansion of China's vineyards for wine production really only began in the 1980s when the People's Republic opened up to international development. This was when the CITIC, the government's foreign investment arm, partnered with the likes of the French government and Rémy Martin to create the Sino-French winery near Beijing. The wines were sold under the label that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. This is the Dynasty label. So that's the partnership with Rémy Martin. At around the same time, Pernod Ricard joins a joint venture to develop a brand called Dragon Seal. And also we have others joining, like LVMH, that's Louis Vuitton Moet and Hennessy, with the Shandong sparkling wine operation in the Ningxia province, that sort of central northern part of China. Towards the 1990s, so the industry was encouraged by the Chinese government in order to replace cereal-based spirits with wine and fruit-based drinks. Now, this was partly in terms of a health campaign, but also partly to address the shortage of grain occurring at that time. From 2000 to now, this is where we have much more investment in the winemaking arena, growing quite vigorously at the time, really to match the development of the domestic and international market. After the build of the Grace Vineyard in the Shaanxi province, we also then have the Rongchen Vineyard, which is in the Hubei province. We have Chateau Changyu Castel in Yantai. And then the investment in the Chinese industry really started to pick up at that time. Now, all of these individual wineries, along with others, were separated from their parent company and set up a winery union in 2006 to carry out collective wine promotions. There's a picture of the Grace Vineyard in Shangji that you see in your picture, quite a famous site. And leading to today, so domestic wine production, despite its 1980s and 1990s expansion, is now experiencing a rationalization in the era of President Xi Jinping. And that's a part of the anti-extravagance measure campaign. So Chinese wineries can no longer rely on gifting any of their production to government officials. Most Chinese wineries are therefore completely shifting their targets to consumers. And this, of course, has hit some operations quite hard, especially considering the majority of wineries in the Ningxia province and some other new areas were established as recently as 2010, spurred by the support from the Ningxia provincial government itself, which was looking for ways in which to develop the rural economy of the prefecture. There is a picture there of President Xi Jinping that you'll see in the picture, and actually toasting with a glass of red wine. Let's talk about a few slides on vineyard management now. So moving now into the management of the grapevine away from history. Now, China has both large amounts of traditionally run vineyards and some modern vineyards developed by international investment, such as the French, like we mentioned earlier. Now, the traditional ones were typically planted with ungrafted vines, as phylloxera in many parts is not thought to be present. The vines were trained either as a multi-cordon fan system, that's where you have multiple cordons grown from a very low trunk, so very anchored to the ground, with then lots of heads. And this almost looks like a fan for existing. You'll see it quite a lot of quite commercial areas, certainly for table grape production. Or it was using the single dragon system, that's a single trunk at a slight angle as a spur pruned cordon. Both of those were designed to carry high yields, but lack a single fruiting zone, which can lead to uneven ripening across the very large vine that is a result. So many wineries have therefore adapted in the modern era, certainly converting to the spur prune chang shaped systems like you see on your slide. Now, these have a trunk that are bended. They look like they're almost blown by the wind. And this therefore means that it allows for easier burial because the graft union of that trunk is at a much lower center of gravity, to therefore very close to the ground and easier to bury this in some parts of China where burying the vine is necessary, but also to ensure that the vine will have a single fruiting zone because it has a horizontally trained cordon to the top. So you'll see that from your slide. You can clearly see that really at about almost 3/4 of a meter from the ground, you have the fruit in almost a uniform line, which means you get much more even ripening. Also, easier access to those grapes. So a little bit about the vine training system just there. Now, we have had China emerging into the international market, but with initially little knowledge and investment from outside. And that is in part down to sort of Chinese, more protectionist policies. Now, as a result, China really entered the market with very dense canopies, overuse of irrigation, excessive use of fertilizer, all contributing actually to quite poor fruit quality. Also, the amount of proper plant material being offered to China in the early stages of development in the 80s and the 90s meant that we had a lot of virused vines, especially with things like leaf roll. And the popularity of varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon and Carmenere is actually problematic with all of these points that you see, because you will really increase the methoxypyrazine. So that increased thiol, that green character with these conditions, certainly huge cropping. Now, improvements in traditionally run vineyards is typically hampered by the lack of viticultural training, um, and good planting material, as mentioned, and of course, really younger, ambitious people. But of course, that is changing. There's a picture of leaf roll virus in your slide. There's a map of China there with the flag imprinted on the top. The government owns all the land in China, and official government units determine all agricultural practices. Now, rural areas are owned by what is called collectives, but they in turn are then really owned by the state. So we have, therefore, real difficulties in terms of making reactive, site specific changes in vineyards because you need official authorization, and this is somewhat of a problem. Independent viticultural advisors do not necessarily have the power to affect what is happening in vineyards. So, to change the training system, for example, unless the advisor is a part of the provincial or local government agricultural unit, the collective. So an outsider or a consultant in, I don't know, in green manures or biodynamics or organics is not just going to happen unless it's a part of the official agenda. And of course, really, the big talking point is about what has to happen in many prefectures during the bitterly cold winters. Vines are typically, in some areas, buried in November, so very quickly after harvest, and then dug out again just before bud burst, so in March or even April. So this requires advanced manual labor skills, and it adds significantly to the cost of production, anywhere really from a fifth to a third in terms of cost in production. Now, this is because whilst mechanization helps, this process is, to be honest, very much led by the manual impact. You'll see there vines being dug out in the Ningxia province that you'll see just there. The cost and availability of labour is somewhat of an issue. Now, this is because the older generation of vineyard workers who are familiar with vine burial practices are not being replaced by the younger generation who are willing to do that back-breaking agricultural work. The young generations are looking to go to the cities, work in software, technology, for example. The older generation is understandably asking for higher pay for their more increasingly rare and specialized skills. This is a particular acute problem near Beijing, for example, in the Huliai province, because of the availability of other employment for younger people. There's other things for young people to do. So, what about the grape varieties in China? Now, it's quite hard to officially quantify what is available, but we have approximations. As indicated, 90% of the vineyard area is planted with varieties suitable for the production of raisins or table grape for consumption, not for the production of wine. The most important grape varieties for winemaking, as I previously said, are black grape varieties. Figures for planting and for production are being treated with caution, like I mentioned. And it's only recently that the OIV has begun to publish statistics that separate table grapes from wine grapes, like we have here on the table on your slide. In addition to the international grape varieties that you see above, China has its own indigenous vine species, like Vitis amurensis, which is named after the Amur Valley of the Liaoning province. And that's really useful due to its resistance to the bitter, cold winters. But like American species, it doesn't tend to make the finest of quality. Often you can find a grapey, musty, sometimes called foxy character from that. So your major grape varieties you'll see here, certainly Vitis vinifera, things like Cabernet Sauvignon by far, Carmenère, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, but then Chardonnay, Riesling and Syrah. At the top of there, you'll see one called Quiojo. Quiojo is similar to like Concord from North America, which goes into things like Welch's purple grape juice, for example. What about winemaking? It's our final slide for this one. Now, China, in terms of red wine, very much follows all things Bordeaux. The template is Bordeaux, and China follows it tooth and nail. Premium and super premium wines are given very extensive aging in wood, typically about 1.5 years, in French oak barriques. You'll see a picture there of the barrel cellar of Chateau Shangyu, of course, very important early trailblazer in China. Now, we know that viticulture was a problem initially, grape growing was a problem, winemaking was also a problem. But in the last decade, there has been significant improvements. The marked reduction in wine faults, such as excess volatility and also Brettanomyces. So we tend to have a reduction in those. Also, wines have a better concentration, a better ripeness of tannin due to the better canopy management and attention to looking after the vineyard as well as harvest date. So there isn't unripe astringent characters coming through as much as previously. The potential for the best Chinese wines was demonstrated when Chinese wine won a top international award for a Cabernet Sauvignon blend. And there is some white wine like Chardonnay and pink wines, but these are very much in the minority. Now, that was a rather long video there, the part one. Please do join me for another long video going through the key wine regions of China. So we'll be talking about Xinjiang, also Winyan, Gansu, Ningxia, Shanxi, Shandong, and also Hubei as well. So we'll look at those key areas. If you do have any comments or questions, please do get in touch. But until next time, I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Goodbye.